Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Well, once again, we gather for our Sunday afternoon webcast and Dhamma reflections. And first of all, I wish to express my good wishes and blessings to everybody in this country and around the world, particularly those who are involved in helping to care for all of the people suffering from the COVID-19 virus and all the attendant difficulties and struggles going along with that. Also for the carers who are looking after the more sort of ancillary duties of preparing food and cleaning the hospitals, driving the ambulances, all of the many people taking care of the amenities that help the nurses, doctors and medical staff to do their work. There's a vast effort being made all around the planet. It's for those who are sick, dying of this pandemic. And so I think it's really important for us to be sending forth our good wishes, cultivating the qualities of gratitude and appreciation for those who are literally laying down their lives to help others and to care for those who are in a state of sickness. And that the weeks are going by, and it's the pandemic is going on, and I realize many people are experiencing a lot of exhaustion and feeling drained and overwhelmed. But as Luang Por Chah would say, sickness and death, they do not have any manners. They're not polite. They don't take our feelings or our preferences into account. So I feel it's good to bear that in mind, and so that regardless of our preferences, our wishes, then there's the need to carry on. And I feel it's a great testament to human fortitude and strength and goodness of heart that people keep going on, keep carrying on in their efforts to help, support and care for others. And this is greatly appreciated, and we send forth all our blessings and our gratitude, our well-wishing towards all of those particularly involved in the care and nursing of the sick during this time. By way of some opening reflections, I was listening to Luang Por Sumedho's weekly offering just earlier today, and he was talking about not thinking about thinking, or how the thinking mind can be so oppressive. There was a few questions he was responding to in this area of what to do with the feelings of worry and anxiety, with the way the mind doesn't want to let go of particular issues, problems, difficulties, struggles, complaints, and so forth. And so I felt this is a very useful theme to explore, and one where Buddhist meditation has a lot to offer. We have this Pali word papancha, which means conceptual proliferation, and it's a very useful term to get to know, to employ, because it's referring to that whole capacity of the mind, the whole habit and urge of the mind to take hold of a thought and then run with it, how the mind gets lost in associative thinking, that we hear a sound or there's a sensation in the body or a random memory arises, and then the attention grabs hold of it, and then it creates one association after another, after another, after another. So this is called papancha, or conceptual proliferation. And the Buddha pointed out that it's because of those habits of papancha, this is how we so easily create a lot of conflict in our lives, conflict between ourselves and other people, or conflict within ourselves. The mind gets drawn into these various avenues of say, elaboration, complication, and stressing, contortion, and confusion. And we find ourselves clashing with each other, clashing with the world around us, and then also clashing within ourselves. We find ourselves torn between different possibilities and different ideas, different feelings within ourselves. We become very divided and conflicted within ourselves as well. So it's very helpful to use meditation to understand how papancha operates and also how to diminish that. And one of the interesting things, or the aspects of the teaching that is related to this, that's interesting and helpful to understand, is that kind of papancha, it needs a fuel, it needs something to power it. And the more that the mind is able to just know a thought as a thought and not add anything onto it, then even a destructive thought or a painful thought or a thought filled with regret or greed or aversion, if it doesn't lead on to other associations, it doesn't have a whole string of associations following from it, then it is not so destructive or painful or difficult. It's not so stressful to the heart. And it needs fuel to have that kind of ongoing effect, to create those strings of association and reaction. So that if we are able to say deprive the thinking mind of that fuel for papancha, that fuel for say those destructive complications and contortions and the strings of association, and instead just let thought be simple and clear and immediate, then our thinking becomes less oppressive or difficult, and our thoughts then can become much more of a beneficial tool than a kind of an affliction on the heart, something that's stressful and painful. But then our thinking mind, our ability to say remember, to use ideas, to imagine, to organize patterns and say perceptions, it becomes a very powerful and helpful, beautiful tool rather than an oppressive affliction. So in terms of meditation, the more mindful we can be, to get to know our thinking processes, and the more that we can say understand how that process of papancha works, how one thing leads to another, that is one of the primary things, one of the most sort of radical and say important primary factors of it. So that if we can be mindful of the thought, and then we can observe as it starts to sort of trigger an association, or you hear the sound of a bird and you say, oh, that sounds like the birds I used to hear in the garden where I grew up, and then you're aware of that thought and you realize that doesn't have to lead to a whole set of reminiscences about growing up in Kent or feelings of say nostalgia or regret or difficulty of things around that time, but rather, oh, it's just the sound of a bird, let go. So one of the things then to understand is that if papancha is deprived of its fuel, then it's much easier to apply that mindfulness. It's much easier to see how that process happens, and to not feed it, to not let the mind get lost in it. So the main fuel for papancha, there's three different things that the Buddha named as what are called the papancha dhammas. And these are craving, tanha, mana, conceit, and ditthi, views. Tanha, mana, and ditthi. So these are the kind of fuel supply. They're the petrol in the tank of the papancha engine. And so if there's no petrol in the tank, the engine can't run. So the more that the heart can be freed of craving and conceit and views, then our thinking can become a very beautiful, helpful, powerful tool that is a blessing to our life. So that if we bring attention to this and to see how that process is being fueled, and we train the heart not to provide more of that fuel, then we can really benefit ourselves. Oh, not to go into too much detail on it, but in particular, these three qualities, they're talking about the different kinds of way that we create ourselves, what is called ahankara, I-making, or mamankara, mind-making. These are the I-making and mind-making habits of the mind. And that it's how the mind takes the idea of I and me and mine and makes that real and solid. That is essentially, I would say, the fuel source for papancha. So these three, the three papancha dhammas, tanha or craving, that's related to the what you can call the owning self. I, the owner. This is mine. This is these are my robes. This is my monastery. It's the I, the owner, feeling the I that is the possessor of things. This belongs to me. This is mine, and so that in the Buddha's second teaching, the Anattalakkana Sutta, the discourse about not self, then he characterized this by the thought etang mama. This is mine. Etang mama. This is mine. So it's a feeling of I as an owner. The second one is to do with conceit or mana, and this is in that same sutta, the Anattalakkana Sutta. The Buddha characterizes this with the phrase "eso hamasmi." This is what I am. Asmi means I am. So it's the feeling of self in terms of being, like I am a man, or I am a Theravada monk, or I am speaking. It's that feeling of I in the mode of being. And so that is to do with the feeling of the quality of conceit or mana. And then the third one, ditthi. There's different ways that this can be related to. Formally, it's say the philosophical views or opinions that you have about how the universe is put together. But reflecting on this, and in the Anattalakkana Sutta, the Buddha uses the phrase "eso me atta." This is myself. So reflecting on this, I feel this is also talking about not just your views and opinions about how the universe is put together, but rather it's your life story. I am Ajahn Amaro. I was born in England, in Kent. I am 63 years old. I am the abbot of Amaravati Monastery. That what you can think of as the narrative self, what we tell when people say, "Where do you come from?" or "Who are you?" or "What do you do?" We recite our name or our job or our age or our family history and such like. So the narrative self is a way of talking about it. So if we are keeping an eye on this self-creating habit, the owning self, the being self, the narrative self, just seeing how much the mind likes to create me, mine, I, me, mine, me and my story. And the more that those habits can be known and then let go of, the more that it can be seen that any kind of self-creation is necessarily a convenient fiction. It's just something that has no fundamental substance or reality, but rather it's just a way of speaking. It's an approximation according to time and place and situation. If the insight into anatta, into not-self, is genuinely and directly developed, then that is what dissolves the papancha dhammas. There's no fuel for that proliferating tendency. That habit, that associative habit, where the mind creates complication. It complicates the uncomplicated. That's so dependent on the self-creating habit, on I and me and mine, the owning self, the being self, the narrative self. And the more that those habits are let go of, that they're not reified or made solid or real or permanent, then a thought is just a thought, a sound is just a sound, a memory is just a memory, an idea is just an idea. It's not wrapped up, it's not tied up with a whole story of me and who I am and what I like, what I don't like, what I've got, what I haven't got, what I used to have, what I want to get. and so forth, the heart can relate far more immediately, instantaneously, and completely to the present moment. And our thinking capacity, our ability to perceive, to remember, to imagine, that can all be put to very good use. It's not as though thinking is a disease. It's our thinking minds can be the most powerful and wonderful tool if they are freed of these habits of papancha. And so that if we learn to recognize these habits of self-creation and to, say, develop the meditation and mindfulness to train the heart to not be, drawn by those habits, to let go of craving, conceit, views, and to see those as impermanent, as empty, as not self, then that goes a long way to helping the mind to be free of the burdens and the stresses, the tensions of papancha, and enables us to live much more harmoniously. As in the primary teaching on this, the Madhu Pindika Sutta, the Majjhima Nikaya, the sweet morsel, the Buddha said how it's because of the mind getting lost in papancha, in conceptual proliferation. That's how we end up taking up weapons and arguing with each other, being in a state of conflict and tension, me against the world, me wanting something that the world has got and I haven't got it, or me oppressed by something that the world is doing to me. That division between me and the world and the stressing that goes on between the two, that's fed by papancha. But if the heart is free of that, then this is the way that the quarrels come to an end. This is the way our conflicts and difficulties come to an end. And it doesn't mean that we're numb or we're switched off or we're sort of dissociated or spaced out, but rather it means that the heart is able to be far more responsive and completely in tune with the reality of the present, and we're able to work much more effectively, relate much more effectively, function much more effectively and harmoniously with each other. So once again, this week there have been quite a few questions sent in, as well as questions from people resident here at Amaravati. I'm not very good at short answers, so I'll try to just get through all of these within an hour, but we'll see how that works out. So let's see. So the first question is, how would you define Mara? Or for those who are not familiar with Buddhist mythology, Mara is in the Buddhist scriptures is the sort of embodiment of delusion and unskillfulness. Literally, the word Mara means death. So Amaravati means the deathless realm. My name, Amaro, means deathless. So Mara is death, Amara is deathless. So it's very familiar word. It's very close to home, literally. So it's literally it means death, but Mara as a being, as an entity, is the embodiment of delusion and unskillfulness, unwholesomeness in the Buddhist scriptures. And so there are numerous occasions where Mara as an entity comes along and tries to give the Buddha a bad time, either before the Buddha's enlightenment or after the Buddha's enlightenment. And not just the Buddha, but also Buddha's disciples. Mara would come along and try to delude people in various different ways. So there's different ways you can look at Mara. You can say that it's a representation of ignorance and delusion, that those same kind of self-centered habits, the I-making, mind-making imperative in the heart. That which is attached to birth and death is Mara. Or you can look at it as an actual entity that is existent as much as we are as human beings. And it depends on your point of view. Certainly in the scriptures, it doesn't just say, by the way, Mara is only symbolic. This is only talking about a psychological quality. There are real dialogues, that this entity comes along and talks to the Buddha, and the Buddha says, I know you, Mara. And then Mara goes off and is say disappointed as one point where Amara's tried to delude the Buddha and has failed to upset him or to delude him or confuse him, and is confuted. He's defeated in his effort, and the scripture describes Amara having been disappointed by his inability to have an impact on the Buddha. He goes off, plunks himself down in the corner with his head drooping, his shoulders sagging, poking the ground with a stick. It's very specific, It's like, and that's not a kind of a symbolic representation. It's a person who's tried to do something, who's failed at it, and they're sitting in a corner, looking glum and miserable, poking the ground with a stick. So it's fairly graphic in that kind of description. I feel I've never personally had any kind of face-to-face visual encounter with a being that I would call Mara. So I've never seen any ghosts or devas either. So I don't have a mind that is given to, say, encountering etheric beings of one kind or another. It doesn't seem to happen in my life, so I can't speak from any direct experience of that kind of Mara. But the other kinds of Mara, the psychological Maras, I certainly can say that I had encounters with, because and I feel one of the most important things in the Buddha's teaching is that we can take the teachings and apply them to our lives and see where they are meaningful to us. And so that the idea of Mara as the embodiment of death, or that which is, say, deluded to the point of thinking this is real, this material object is real and absolute, these individual entities, they are real, they are absolute, this gold has value, this position in society has value, this reputation has value, this failure is absolute and real. When Mara comes along one time and it's the hot season and the Buddha lies down to take a rest in the middle of the day, and Mara comes along and says, "What do you think you're doing? You're supposed to be an enlightened being. You're lying down in the hot season, taking a nap, just like a kind of an ordinary worldly person. What kind of enlightened master are you?" And the Buddha responds by saying, Mara, this is the hot season, and according to the needs of the body, I mindfully lay myself down, set in place the time for awakening. I put my head down, I take a rest, and then I wake up, and there's no delusion when I put my head down. There's no delusion when I wake up. There's no blame in this. This is an utterly blameless thing to do in accordance with the time, the place, the situation. And so once again, Mara is confuted and defeated in that. So that you can look upon Mara in these various ways. And in terms of the mythology, they talk about 5 Maras. And I've studied this a bit. I wrote a novel called Mara and the Mangala, which involves Mara a lot, one way or another. And at the beginning of it, I talk about how there's 5 different kinds of Mara in Buddhist mythology, and they're associated with the 5 khandhas. Again, not to go into too much detail, but you have Machu Mara, who is the killer, so that represents physical death. So it's that Mara which says, death is real and absolute. It's to do with physical death. Then the second one, associated with Vedana, or feeling, sensation, is Kilesa Mara, and that's the Mara of the defilements. That's the lie that this delicious thing is absolutely delicious, or this wrongdoing that somebody has carried out that's absolutely wrong, absolutely evil, and can't be forgiven. So the Kilesa Mara is the way the mind believes in its defilements. If something is bad, it's absolutely bad and worthy of hatred, or something is attractive, it's absolutely good and needs to be possessed. The third one, Khandha Mara, is associated with perception, And so that's the Mara, the attitude of mind that believes in the five khandhas as being real. The body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, consciousness as being substantial and real. It's essentially the I am the body, I am the personality, this is who and what I am, and the mind that takes that to be true, that Mara, which is the influencer of that attitude. And then the fourth one is Abhisankara Mara, which is associated with thinking. So that's the Mara that believes all our opinions or believes our thoughts. So talking about papancha earlier on. So it's this influence of this Mara is that which enables or persuades the mind to believe all of its thoughts are true and real, and that thought is an absolute reality. So that's Abhisankara Mara. And then the fifth one is to do with bright mind states. And so this is called Devaputamara. And this is very interesting because it carries a close parallel with the biblical tradition, the Judeo-Christian tradition of Lucifer. Lucifer was the brightest of the archangels. Lucifer literally means the bright one, or the radiant one. So Lucifer was one of the highest of the archangels, but then, because of wanting to compete with Jehovah, and then got thrown down from heaven down into the pits of hell. This Devaputamara is in Buddhist cosmology, you have 7 sensual heavens. So the 7th heaven is called the Paranimita Vasavati heaven. That's the highest of the Deva realms before you get into the Brahma realms. So Devaputamara is the ruler of the Paranimita Vasavati heaven. So he's the brightest and the most powerful of all of the Devas of the sensual realms. So again, like Lucifer, he's the bright one, he's the radiant one. So this Mara is the Mara that takes bright and radiant, wholesome mind states to be absolute and real, and so that the way the mind can attach to goodness and take it to be self. So it's a much more subtle kind of delusion, but still one that is dangerous and destructive. So I feel if we want to reflect upon what Mara is, then I want to get to know Mara, or to say make that something that's a useful concept, seeing how the delusory process works in those different domains of our experience through all of the spectrum of the 5 khandhas, whether it's the body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, or those bright states of consciousness, to see how the mind can take those things essentially to be real and to be who and what we are. Second one. Most of us are slightly awakened and have developed dispassion towards worldly attachments, but still haven't penetrated the truth. For myself, I understand the truth intellectually and have great faith in Lord Buddha and his teachings, but tenuous circumstances tend to cloud my vision due to absence of pativeda. So pativeda means realization or penetration. You have pariyati is study, patipati is practice, and then pativeda is realization. Can one actually see their past lives and all the different realms in this cosmos with their beings? For seeing them in reality will remove this veil of ignorance forever. Well, I would say that last sentence doesn't quite follow absolutely from the previous one. So the two parts of the question were, can one actually see their past lives and all the different realms in this cosmos with their beings? I would say, yeah, some people can do. I don't have that ability, but certainly the Buddha did. There are beings who can see into past lives, see into different dimensions of being, can actually visit different realms, and so might be very well acquainted with Mara and all the Devas and Brahmas and Yakas and Kinaris and the Gandhabas and the great pantheon of different entities that are around, hungry ghosts and demons and such like. I don't have those particular abilities, But there are those who can see those beings or visit those different realms. Or Mahamoggallana, also one of the Buddha's great disciples, was very well known to be able to visit those kind of different domains and encounter such beings. However, that last sentence which says, "For seeing them in reality will remove this veil of ignorance forever." Well, I would say that's a bit of a presumption, because not everybody who can see lots of different realms is necessarily liberated. And just having the information or being able to see things doesn't mean that you understand them. And so that an immediate association that came to mind is that you can read a lot of books, or you can spend your days and nights surfing the internet. You can gather a lot of information. There's staggering amounts of information. Just Wikipedia on its own is far more information than one person could consume in a lifetime. But yet, even though the information is there, it doesn't mean to say that it's liberating. And so that just to have a vision of the cosmos, or to see into different realms, that is not necessarily something useful or beneficial. And there are times where this is really brought home. When Anuruddha was one of the Buddha's disciples, and before his enlightenment, there's a dialogue between him and Venerable Sariputta, and one of the things he says is that my mindfulness is unrelenting, I'm energetic, I'm alert, I can see into the 10,000-fold universal system. Anuruddha, even before his enlightenment, he was able to see into different realms, and he said, but still, my heart is not liberated from the defilements. It's not freed from ignorance. And then Venerable Sariputta says these abilities that he has, or these wholesome qualities, they're just related to his laziness, his conceit, and it'd be far better for him to not pay attention to that, but to instead to attend to the deathless, to bring attention to the deathless. And so that advice from his friend, Venerable Sariputta, then helps Anuruddha to kind of make the final breakthrough and to realize arahantship. So that the ability to see into different realms, and also I would say there's quite a lot of people who have different psychic abilities or different kind of capacities to see and to divine things, maybe quite accurately, but they can still be very deluded. And I think there's people making lots of money, having whole careers out of having certain sensitivities, being able to discern patterns of one kind or another, or see into different realms, or read people's minds to certain degrees. And there can be a degree of accuracy and a degree of validity, but it doesn't mean to say that their interpretations are unbiased, or they're clear, or they are indeed liberated themselves, and they could be very confused, conceited, and such like. So, and actually, incidentally, my entry point into spiritual life was through the Rudolf Steiner tradition, and it was through having contact with a teacher in London when I was a student many years ago, back in the 70s, and this was much more his domain. The Rudolf Steiner had extraordinary psychic abilities and could see into different realms of existence. And this fellow who gave lectures every week and was a good friend, very very helpful, very inspiring in many ways, and some of the things that he could see were very accurate. The first time he met me, I was a hairy student, kind of wearing kind of rainbow-colored hippie student clothing, and in our first conversation together, he stopped in the middle of a sentence and said, "Your life's been very connected with horses, hasn't it?" And I said, "How did you know that?" He said, "Oh, doesn't matter." And there's no way he could have known that I grew up on a farm riding ponies and horses, and that was my background. Yeah, we'd met. This was meeting for the first time. So that got my attention, and some of the advice that he gave was very, very helpful. But he certainly was not a particularly happy man, and his life had a lot of confusions and conflicts and difficulties within it. So just because one can see into different realms and have perhaps accurate, perceptions, it doesn't mean that the heart is liberated. So I think it's far more, as the advice of Sariputta to Anuruddha, to realize the deathless is far more important than seeing into different realms. And maybe one last thing to say on that was, one time somebody apparently came to visit Sri Ramana Maharshi, and who was known and respected as a great sage in India, and they were asking Sri Ramana who they were in a previous lifetime. And according to the story, Sri Ramana Maharshi said, "Why do you want to know who you were in a past life when you don't even know who you are in this one?" Which I thought was an extremely good answer. So, dear Ajahn, I try to apply the 5 precepts in my day-to-day life, but have a problem in respect of that to refrain from taking life. My problem is in respect of house moths, the tiny pencil line variety. The reason being that a couple of years ago when moving furniture, I discovered that they had feasted on my carpets, ruining large areas. I do not want either my carpets or other materials to be destroyed in this manner, therefore I kill them whenever I see them, as I have developed an aversion for them. This produces a negative feeling for having taken life. In these circumstances, do I need to abstain from taking the 5 precepts? I would say it would be better to abstain from killing the moths. Since you're asking me, since it might produce a negative feeling in you, but it produces an extremely negative feeling in the moths, who are the killies. So that, and I think with respect to the precepts, they're precepts, they're advice that are given by the Buddha and us of his disciples, but they're there for a reason. And so that I think it's one of the things that's helpful to reflect in this is to look at the moths and to ask yourself the question, why is my life and my carpet more important than you? Just to ask that question and let it really sink into the heart. I'm reminded that many years ago when I lived up in Northumberland, at Harnham Monastery, somebody had given me a plant, a pot plant. And as you might know, sometimes when a plant is in a shop, they feed the plant up so they're blossoming and bright and strong in the shop window, but they're a bit overstoked, and so they can't sustain themselves. And so very shortly after they come into your home, they get exhausted, and they are far more prone to being invaded by other creatures who feed on them. So this is what had happened, this very sort of bright, shining pot plant. I had it for a few days, it was looking bright and cheerful, and then it started to get exhausted, and then green flies started showing up. So I had a paintbrush, and I very carefully would be removing the green fly and exporting them out of the window. But then green fly breed at an extraordinarily impressive rate, and so that as fast as I could remove them, they would be multiplying. And so I got more and more stressed about trying to remove all the green fly without hurting the green fly and looking after my plant. And so this went on for a few days, and I realized, I think I'll stop having a pot plant and I'll just have a green fly farm instead. I'll just change my attitude. So it's like that E. Cummings poem, Uncle Sol's Worm Farm, if any of you are familiar with that. It's you can look it up for yourselves, Uncle Sol's Worm Farm. So that's one thing, to respect the life of the moths, I would suggest, is far more beneficial. And then just consider changing your floor covering. Again, it's up to you. I'm not sure where you live or what your situation is, but to replace your carpet, to remove the carpet that's there and replace it with a wooden floor or a laminate floor or even concrete, and just have rugs that are far more easy to pick up and shake out and to look after, because I think, and I do believe it's more important to say, consider those questions. How could my life be more important than you? Yeah, I have my preferences, and they arise, and I've got my agenda, but how could my life really be more important than yours? And in terms of the Buddhist understanding, whether you're a human being or you're an aphid or a moth, then those lives are all worthwhile. So it's a panatipata is any breathing thing, so that we make our own decisions and we live with the results of the decisions that we make. But I would suggest that kind of reflection is a very helpful place to begin. Dear Ajahn, this has been a question that I've had for a long time and would like to humbly ask your thoughts on this. As far as I'm aware, correct me if I'm wrong, there are a couple of instances where monks commit suicide in the Pali Canon, Vakali and Godika. I would like to know some thoughts on this. Are these stories implying that Buddhism has a more liberal view of taking one's own life under certain circumstances? Or as per the first precept, is it strictly forbidden? Thank you very much, and hope you and the other Ajahns have the best of health and well-being. Well, it's following on from the one about the moths. Human lives are considered extremely precious, and so in our monastic rule, to take the life of a moth is a medium level offense. To take the life of a human being is a disrobing offense. So that if you willingly or deliberately cause the death of another human being, then your life as a monastic is over. Not that you stop breathing, but you can't carry on as a nun or as a monk. So it's a very serious offense. Those two instances of Vakali and Godika were they were both arahants. Venerable Godika was a bit more back and forth than Vakali, but Vakali was an arahant when he took his own life. And in those instances, the Buddha, and in the Vinaya discipline, the Buddha, when he talks about it, he says, if someone is an arahant and they take their own life, then only in that instance is it blameless. And the reason why both of them, if I remember correctly, took their lives was because of being in a state of extreme illness, and so that they didn't want to be a burden to their fellow monastics, to look after them and nurse them and take care of them, so that they chose to end their lives. But so unless one is an arahant, I would say is absolutely to be avoided. That it's taking a human life, whether it's your life or somebody else's life, is an extremely serious and say karmically heavy thing to do. So I would say that in those instances, that the specific thing that made it quote unquote blameless in the eyes of the Buddha and the Dhamma Vinaya was that they were arahants, and it was out of that sense of compassionate concern for not wanting to be a burden to their fellows that they took their lives. But this kind of question is asked fairly often. And people often they'll say things, well, it's my life, it's my choice. But I would say that's a very a view based on self and opinion, and that I've had within my own family quite a few suicides, and it's not just you as an individual that taking your own life. When people take their lives, it has a radical effect on everyone around them, family and friends, and it doesn't go away it lingers on and on and on and on and on. And so, and then what the karmic effects are for the person who's killed themselves in terms of future lifetimes and the effects of that, then just as killing another living being, killing a human being, there would be negative karmic effects from that. So I would say it would be important to be respectful of that, and to not think, well, it's my that idea, well, it's my life, it's my choice. I can't live the life that I want to be living, therefore I choose to end it. It's a sort of, I think, a very mechanistic and narrow view, and particularly now with assisted suicide and that even being legal in a few countries, this question comes up more and more often. So I feel it's important to tread extremely carefully and to consider that the human life is extremely precious, and that these two instances are not to be taken as examples unless you happen to be an arahant. But if you were an arahant, you probably wouldn't be asking the question in the first place. with all due respect. So I'm not trying to make light of it, but I think that it's not just a mechanical question. It's not just a question of preference or convenience, but there's a lot of karmic weight. There's a lot of vipaka, or resultant karma, that goes with the deliberate ending of a human life. Though this question probably falls soundly into the category of, quote, not related to the goal, unquote, how would one ever establish where they are with regards to sotapanna? For example, if a being in the human realm is chugging along at rebirth number 5 and have 2 more to go until sakadagami, give or take, how would one ever know this without getting lost in thought about attainments? Well, I might have to give a little bit of a background to this. So, according to the Buddhist psychology, say a sotapanna, someone who's arrived at the level of stream entry, then they're guaranteed to have no more than 7 lifetimes before realizing full and complete enlightenment. And that those 7 lifetimes will necessarily be in the human realm or the deva realm. They can't be born in the animal realm or the ghost realm or the hell realms. So, as it said, the gates to the lower realms are closed. So this raises the question, and this is what this is based on here. So somebody can be a sotapanna when they pass away, and so when they're born in their next life, as a human being, technically they're a sotapanna when they're born, right? So that's what's the experience of a sotapanna when they're a newborn sotapanna? So this is not the first time this question has been asked. I don't know whether by this person. So so when they're asking the question, chugging along at rebirth number 5. So maybe 4 or 5 lifetimes ago, somebody realized sotapanna, and they've had another 3 or 4 lifetimes as a sotapanna. They haven't gone any further. And so how would they know if they're on rebirth number 5 or 4, or they're at number 6? How many more? How would they know? And so that essentially I would say, well, they wouldn't know. But the first thing to say is that they wouldn't know, but there are instances. I was talking about this a little while back with other Sangha members. There's a number of instances where people have realized stream entry and haven't even realized they've reached that point. They've in a sense arrived at that kind of maturity, but they haven't got a name for it, or they hadn't realized what it was that they'd realized. And so there's a few passages in the connected discourses. There's a whole section, the Samyutta Nikaya, there's a whole section on stream entry called the Sotapatti Vagga, the section on stream entry. So there's a number of suttas in there where people have realized stream entry but haven't realized that they have realized it, if you understand. They've reached that point, but they haven't realized that they've reached that point. And so that there's a helpful advice that the Buddha gives right in at the end of his life in the human realm, in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the discourse on the Buddha's last days, and he describes what is called the mirror of the Dhamma, which is precisely for this. If someone wants to know whether they've arrived at stream entry or not, they might not know whether they're on rebirth number 3, 4, 5, or 6, but to tell whether the mind has arrived at that point of no return, that has arrived at the breakthrough. And in that mirror of the Dhamma that the Buddha describes, there are 4 qualities, and the first 3 are unwavering faith in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and then the 4th is that their sila, their virtue is untainted, unspotted. They have a strong moral integrity, and that's what he says. That's the mirror of the Dhamma. You want to sort of check yourself, like you look at your face in a mirror, to use that as a way of measuring whether the heart is established in that level of spiritual maturity. In terms of the question here, how would one ever know without getting lost in thought about attainments? I think it's best not to think about attainments at all. And my own experience with my teachers, Lumpur Cha, Lumpur Sumedho, very, very rarely talked about levels of attainment, and certainly never said to anyone, you've reached this level or you've reached that level. Lumpur Sumedho would often speak about developing the qualities that lead to stream entry. So I remember being on a retreat with him where for 10 days, every Dhamma talk was either about letting go of self-view, letting go of attachment to conventions, and letting go of doubt. Every talk, every piece of instruction was around those three qualities, which are the first three fetters, the three samyojanas. So it was all about, guiding the heart towards that level of realization, but he never mentioned stream entry once. So he talked about the means whereby those qualities can be realized, but not actually putting a name on it, because of the competing mind, the comparing mind can be such an obstacle. So I think that this is, the way this question is put is quite, in a way, it indicates that, it's easy for the mind to get lost about thoughts about attainments, and that's an obstruction, because it feeds self-view, in a way asking the question, which level have I got to? If that I seems solid and real, that means self-view has not been seen through. If that I is seen as a convenient fiction, then maybe that indicates a closer level or a more accurate or reliable perspective. One thing, though, about that question of about what's the experience of a stream enterer at birth or in childhood if they have never even, particularly if they're born into a non-Buddhist family or a non-Buddhist country, the language of Buddha Dhamma and such like are not going to be around. The indicators are not going to be around. And then talking about this with others and reflecting on it, my understanding would be that as soon as such a person, as they're growing up or in childhood, as soon as they came across spiritual teachings, they would make sense. Like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Or, oh right, that sounds true. Or their own feeling for virtue. They'd be naturally virtuous. If they told a lie, they would feel really guilty about it. Or if they stole something, they'd feel terribly guilty about it. Or or if they killed something, they'd feel very uncomfortable about that. And so there'd be a strong natural sense of virtue in such a child. I would acknowledge that this is speculation on my part, but just thinking it through and just sort of talking with people over the years, that's how I feel it would take shape, and that again, there could be that just as with those instances in the mentioned in the Samyutta Nikaya, it could be that a being has reached that level and not realize that they have reached it, but and not have a name for it, even throughout the whole lifetime. It could be the case. But the important thing is not what you call it, or having some sort of name for a level that has been reached, but rather that quality of goodness in and of itself. That's the thing that really matters. The wisdom and purity of heart. Those are the things that really matter, irrespective of what you call it or what level has been reached. Okay, so to continue. I have found the teachings of Ajahn Sumedho and Ajahn Amaro honest and insightful, and their words assist my staggered journey on a very uneven path, which often leaves me sitting on the roadside hoping for a lift. Now, if I thumbed a lift with a trucker and he played some Lou Reed and cracked open a bottle of beer, that in itself might not be a bad life lesson. But if you were kind enough to pull over, assuming I would be driving something, if I was kind enough to pull over, what advice would you give to a willing listener? P.S. Ajahn Sumedho's "It's like this, it's like this" are 3 small words, but say so much, and are like the keel keeping the boat steady in a storm. So, assuming I'm driving along and I pick up some stranded spiritual wayfarer along the side of the road. I last drove in 1977, so I wouldn't trust myself on the road. So I think it depends entirely on the individual. Who are you picking up? Are they an old man? Are they a young woman? What language do they speak? What's going to be meaningful? So that is it. I think it's easy to assume that the advice is appropriate to one person is going to be appropriate to another person, and it's not the case. And that just the evidence of being around spiritual teachers, say like Luang Por Chah, Luang Por Sumedho, or looking at the Buddha's teachings, the range of ways that the Buddha responds to the variety of people that come to him is extraordinary. It's enormous. So it would what words would be useful would vary completely according to who it is that's picked up by the roadside. Having said that, then there's a couple of teachings that you get. You get about as broad of a net. It casts as broad a net as possible, and one of which is that comes to mind reading this question is from the Majjhima Nikaya, the middle-length discourses. There's a place where in the shorter discourse on the destruction of craving, the Chula Tanha Sankhaya Sutta, where the Buddha says, he uses this phrase, Sabbe Dhamma Nalang Abhinivesaya, nothing whatsoever should be clung to. Don't cling to anything. He said, if you've heard this, you've heard everything. If you've understood this, you've understood everything. If you've practiced this, you've practiced everything. If you've realized this, you've realized everything. If you've come to the complete fulfillment of this, you've fulfilled everything. So essentially, if you just know this, if you take that one principle of don't cling to anything, and you apply that, then that's really all you need to do. And so that's a 4-word synopsis, don't cling to anything. And then in terms of who the person might be or what their disposition, that's pretty broad in its applicability, so that's likely to apply to anybody and everybody. And if you want to boil it down even more, so to make it even more succinct, I would say simply don't be selfish. And that's, if we take that principle of not seeing things in terms of self-view, not thinking selfishly, but to see things in terms of nature, then that goes a long way to helping everyone's lives to be more kind of peaceful and more fulfilled and more liberated. Okay, this one is about pain. Dear Ajahn, during my sitting meditation, I always face a lot of pain on the right side of my body. I focus on the sensations, trying to still the mind on that area, being here and now. The result is that the pain becomes more intense, with strong heat, really difficult. Can you give any guidelines to deal with this? Well, again, it depends on the individual, what's going to be helpful, what's going to work. So I can't guarantee that any advice that I gave would be helpful. But sometimes the way that the mind takes hold of an object is not just there's not just like a single way that we can pick something up. So if you're focusing on something, it can be focusing with great intensity, and also again, to harp on the theme of self-view. It could be, I need to practice with this. This is my pain. I've got a pain problem. I'm feeling it really strongly. I've got to do something with it. When's it going to go? So I will not have this pain. So there can be a lot of sincerity, but the very way that the thing is being held is generating a lot more tension and stress in the system. So that we can pick something up and hold it fairly firmly, and we're not going to drop it, but without that kind of tension. So I'm holding this light controller, and it's firmly in my hand. I'm not going to drop it, but there's no tension being generated by the way it's being held. So that perhaps looking at the way that the mind is focusing on that painful feeling, the degree to which it's my pain, I'm doing this so that it will end. I hope this will end. So often we're dealing with pain. For myself, I found that if the mind is creating, not just creating self, but creating time, If you're waiting for it to be over, if the mind creates the idea that, oh, when this is not here, then everything will be great. That it's creating time. There's this future where this pain is not, and then everything will be good. And so if the mind is buying into that, then necessarily you're creating dukkha right there. And so my experience with painful feeling is what helps most is total surrender. There's not waiting for it to be over. There's a sort of relaxed openness to it, letting go of self, letting go of time. Here it is. It's like this. And in a way, applying that insight and reflection on not self, rather than my pain or my problem or I've got this, when's it going to be over so I will feel okay, just to let all of that self-creating and the time-creating habits fall away, so that in this moment it's exactly like this, not waiting for it to be over, because waiting is dukkha, waiting is suffering. And that there's a patience, but it's not patience based on time, it's a patience based on open-heartedness and surrender. There's okay, here it is, it's like this. And so there's a profound relaxation. So what that does is that there's not just a relaxation of attitude, there's also a relaxation of the body. So similarly, if the mind the attention is brought into the body and it's noticed there's a tensing up around the area where, say, the person is saying they feel it in their right side. So if there's a tensing up against the pain, the way that we resist, then relaxing into it, so that bringing attention into that part of the body and relaxing the muscles of that part of the body to the extent that that's possible. Because even though we tense up against a pain to try and relieve it, the tension creates causes for more pain, generally, in my experience. So just relaxing the body, relaxing the whatever tension that happens to be in that part of the body, can help to remove the causes of pain that are say, unknowingly being generated, so that the relaxation in the body, relaxation in the attitude, then helps to make the whole thing much more workable. Dear Ajahn Amaro, of the two interpretations for the refuge of the Buddha, the one from the Thai forest tradition, with the Buddha as, quote, the one who knows, makes more sense to me as an ultimate refuge than the historical Buddha. Nevertheless, the suttas appear to only describe this refuge in terms of the characteristics of the historical Buddha. Do you think that this is because of how the suttas were edited and simplified in the early councils? I would think that the Buddha would also have considered, quote, the one who knows, unquote, as a valid refuge. Well, it's a good question. I think that there's along with Mara and the sort of stylization of language, then it's good to, as we say, chant the qualities of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, to not just to be considering them in their external forms, or sort of the exo quality, the external qualities, but also the endo, the internal qualities. And so then, when you recite the qualities of the Buddha, it's interesting to think of that. Well, this Buddha is talking about the awake quality of my mind. So then we use a phrase like the Buddha, absolutely pure with ocean-like compassion. It can sound as though we're talking about Gautama Buddha, our great teacher and the founder of this sasana of 2,500 years ago, but also it can be talking about the quality of wisdom and wakefulness of your own heart. That Buddha, that wisdom of your own heart, which is absolutely pure, and whose compassion is ocean-like. And even though it uses the masculine pronouns, he is awake and holy, you can, I think, just say to reflect, okay, this quality of wakefulness, awareness, and I'm praising these qualities of the Buddha, accomplished in knowledge and conduct, absolutely pure, awake and holy, that when we are reflecting on and bowing to those qualities, that I'd say that even though the language might indicate an external person, it can still be used to praise and revere and cherish those same qualities of our own heart. As to whether there was the editing of the suttas and so on, I can't say. I have my own. I suspect that over 2,500 years, there's necessarily a fair amount of editing that goes on. But also, I feel in reading that question, one of the things that is I feel very important is, and the reason why we use the word Buddha to describe, the great being who is our teacher. So in his own lifetime, he was more often known as the Samana Gautama or the Bhagawan, the Blessed One, and so that the reason, one of the reasons why the word Buddha is used is there was an encounter between the Buddha and a Brahmin called Dona. So Dona was wandering along this road in the countryside, and he saw the footprints in the dust. And he saw the marks in the footprints were extraordinary. These lines and shapes, the circular wheels and the lines from the Buddha's feet, he saw impressed in the dust of the road, and thought, well, who do these feet belong to? This is some kind of extraordinary being has come this way. Who could this be? So he follows the footsteps off the road into the forest, and then he sees the Buddha sitting under a tree, meditating. And he's amazed, impressed by this radiant, peaceful being sitting there, and is very touched and sort of struck by that presence. So then he asks he sort of kneels down in front of him and says, excuse me, forgive me for asking, but are you a Deva? And he says, no, I'm not a Deva. And he said, are you a Brahma god? And he said, no, I'm not a Brahma god. He says, are you a yaka? He said, no, I'm not a yaka. And then he says, are you a human being? And he says, no, I'm not a human being. Manuso. He said, no. So when the Buddha is asked, are you a human being? He says, no. And I checked this recently, and yeah, that's the exchange. He says, are you a manusa? And he says, no. And so then Dona eventually gets to the end of his list and says, well, excuse me, but what are you? And he said, know me as one who is awake, buddhosmi, buddho asmi, buddhosmi. So even when the Buddha is asked, are you a person, are you a human being, he says no. He was born of human parents, he had a human body, but when asked, are you a person, he says no. But when then asked to characterize what he is, he says, I am awake, buddhosmi, I am awake. So that's a very significant exchange, I feel, and my suspicion in terms of guessing around the scriptures and the tradition, I suspect that particular dynamic is one of the main reasons why the word Buddha was used for him, and has been the main word used over the centuries to refer to him, to this great being. And so that in terms of that as a refuge, that is saying right there, the person is not the refuge, wakefulness is the refuge. And that is in reflecting on the qualities of the Buddha, even though the person walked the earth and there were footprints in the dust made by a person, that's not the quality to focus on, but the quality that is the thing to focus on is that of wakefulness itself. Okay. Dear Ajahn, I feel there is a grey overlapping area between discernment and judgment. How to make a clear distinction between the two? Thank you. Well, it kind of depends how you define discernment and how you define judgment. I think if we take judgment as being, I like this, I don't like that, I approve of this, I don't approve of that, and discernment as being another word for wisdom, then I think that's a helpful distinction to make. If that's what the question is referring to, and my guess is that. So in terms of the difference between wisdom and intelligence, then, would be, or the judgmental mind. Wisdom always has a quality of leading towards the ending of suffering. it doesn't mean to say things to be guided by wisdom or to be guided by a true understanding doesn't mean everything will not be painful. Or it might not lead to pain. I mean, wisdom might say you need to go to the dentist, so pain is going to come from that. But it leads to the ending of dukkha, the ending of tensing and stressing and complaining and the feeling of wrongness in the heart. So that's the quality of wisdom. It contains the quality, the attribute of understanding, but it's more to do with an understanding based in Dhamma. It's an understanding that is seeing the nature of experience itself. So wisdom is not just understanding how the objects are put together, but also how the mind is experiencing its objects. So wisdom always has a recognition of the nature of experiencing itself. Intelligence or judgment is much more to do with arranging the objects and understanding how the objects connect with each other and the patterns that form between the different objects, and so that there's more of a with judgmentalism or intelligence. There isn't that reflective capacity. There isn't a recognition of, oh, this is the way my mind is putting it together, or this is necessarily subjective, or this is just this can only be a part of the picture, and so that the use of intelligence or judgmentalism often leads to more dukkha or more division, or like how you might have a perfectly formed opinion or be able to solve a particular puzzle or explain a particular situation, but doesn't mean to say that you'll be happy about it or you'll be able to relate to it in a skillful way. But with wisdom, there's a quality of appreciating the whole picture, and also how that this is part of the mind's experiential field, and also when wisdom is applied, there's a directionality. It's say steering things. So it's going to encourage choices and attitudes that lead towards the ending of dukkha, that lead towards a sense of say orderliness, things being in accord with Dhamma, in accord with reality. So it's going to lead towards the ending of dukkha rather than to more alienation or more insecurity, more difficulty, if that makes sense. So to make a clear distinction between the two, then if with judgment, judgmentalism, again going back to the theme of self-view, often judgment and judgmentalism, or just using the intelligence, there is often I think, I understand, or my opinion is, or that is, I think that's right, or that's wrong. There's a strong sense of self-view involved in judgment. I'm right, you're wrong. There's an absolute and self-centered quality there that is a tone that occupies or fills the air around a judgment, whereas with wisdom, then there isn't that same kind of selfing around it. Okay. Dear Ajahn, is there in Buddhism a parallel to the biblical story of the Tower of Babel? Thank you. This is where the humans were building up a tower so high it was going to reach up into the heavens. So the heavenly authorities decided they didn't want to be invaded, so they caused all the different people to start speaking in different languages, so they couldn't understand each other and they couldn't complete building the tower. So that's the sort of mythology of how we all ended up speaking different languages. So Norwegian, Polish, French, German, Spanish, etc., 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 Japanese, Chinese, Thai. So and then the sort of footnote says, so self-view leading to pride and loss of a single language. Could it be a reading. There are similar suttas, there's similar instances, not particularly to do with language, but where the Buddha talks about evolution and how there's sort of division and argument, how things start off very harmonious and everyone's working together in a good way, and beings have a very refined quality, and then things get more divisive and argumentative. And there's two suttas in the long discourses, Digha Nikaya. One is called the Cakkavatti Sihanada Sutta, or the lion's roar on the turning of the wheel, and then the other one's called the Aganya Sutta, the discourse on the origins of things. So they're side by side. There's suttas 26 and 27 in the Digha Nikaya. I looked them up before this session. They give different stories, but it's basically the same kind of pattern. Is that things start out from a very sort of refined, and beings are extremely sort of have long lives, and they're very pure natures, and then they slowly get more and more degenerate, and they start owning things and arguing with each other, and then forming genders and owning property, and then in one of the suttas, in the first one, the Cakkavatti Sihanada Sutta, then things get so bad, so conflicted, that the human lifespan diminishes to about 10 years, and there's just a constant state of conflict. There's this period of 7 days where it gets down to the nadir of human degeneration. It's called a sword interval. So weapons appear in the hands of beings that automatically start fighting with each other for no real reason other than it's another being, therefore fight it. But then it sort of swings up from that, and things come together, and certain beings feel like, why are we doing this? Or we don't have to be this way. We don't have to be fighting with each other like this. And then it rescues itself. The other one, the Aganya Sutta, when things have degenerated and become there's a lot of conflict and poor morals, then they find a good leader. They appoint the most trustworthy or reliable person amongst them to be a leader, and then it goes on to describe how the different castes formed from that. So that it's a similar thing where things start out in a pure state, and then often it's ownership of property, ownership of access to food or such like, that then causes things to get coarser and more violent, and causing degeneration and difficulty between beings. So it's not identical to the Tower of Babel, but there's some similarities, and it's so greed and pride and ownership are often the causes of difficulty. Dear Ajahn, I have a dear friend listening in from Australia who has been curious of the Buddha's teaching for some time. I wondered if you could explain how these teachings can help us with day-to-day life, and perhaps what is the essence of the Buddha's teachings. Blessings to my friend and all his friends and family. Thank you. How many hours have we got? Well, I think what I said earlier about Sabhe Dhamma Nalang Abhinivesaya, that if we take that simple principle of don't cling to anything, just where the mind clings, whether it clings to an opinion, it clings to my property, it clings to my reputation, it clings to the people I love, it clings to my memories, my plans, then wherever the mind clings, whether it's to an object of sense desire, it clings to an opinion, it's necessarily going to bring tension and difficulty and division, alienation within us. And so that if we really want to apply the Buddha's teachings in a helpful way, notice where the clinging is happening and then let go. So wherever the mind clings, whether it's to a memory or to a plan or to an opinion or to an emotion, clinging to a physical object, then wherever the clinging happens, that's where you let go. And then the letting go having happened, then notice what it's like, how pleasant it is to be not clinging. And then you don't have to be persuaded that it's a good idea, because you can know for yourself, you can see and feel it for yourself. After having built one's paramis with one's effort and training, can they also decrease again over time when being lazy? Short answer, yes. All formations are impermanent. So, that might be very depressing, like eek. But I think it's helpful to be practical. I mean, it's like any kind of a skill. If you have developed a skill, it doesn't go away completely. But if you don't use if you don't use it, you'll lose it, as they say. And that the certain skills and parameters, they might have been developed, but if you don't apply it, you don't keep it alive, then the potential might still be there, but it becomes covered over, becomes encrusted in layers of laziness or self-view or just complacency. And so that it's so one of the most important things with spiritual practice is to sustain the motivation and not to take things for granted or to be too presumptuous. So I apologize if that's disappointing and depressing, but that's what springs to mind. I think that the basic law of nature that all things are impermanent, sabbe sankhara anicca, if it's a thing, it's impermanent. And the paramita, a spiritual quality or a psychological quality, it's a thing. It's part of the natural order, and so if it isn't exercised and used and sustained, then like every other thing in nature, it has its own cycle of life, and so having come into being, it will degenerate, and so that I feel is even though you thought, well, I've got all that in the bank, so I can rely on that. That if I don't want to be too disappointing, but I feel it's in a way more skillful and more realistic, more genuinely in tune with reality to acknowledge that if we really value the paramitas, these spiritual qualities, then it's suitable, sensible, wise to make the effort to keep them alive and not think, okay, well, I got that finished, that's all done, I can park that, I can forget about that. The mind that says, I don't need to be bothered with that, speaking from personal experience, is not an attitude to be trusted. Well, that's sorted, that's done, I don't have to worry about that anymore. That's usually a recipe for trouble. Okay, last ones here. 2 questions came in from my friend. As a reaction to rudeness, cruelty, greed, stupidity and selfishness, I can't help it but to feel contempt for it. How can I deal with this better, please? Well, I think reading the question, that to start by having an attitude of loving kindness for your contempt. We can't just snap our fingers and be different. And just so if there's a habit of sort of contemptuous sort of, how can people be so rude, or that stupid, selfish person. Yeah. If that's what arises, to be compassionate and have loving kindness to your own contemptuous feelings, to say to really feel your own hard-heartedness. Well, what's it like to be superior? Yeah. Well, to be better, to have that sense of, how can you be so awful? Just to let that, in a way, sort of catch that attitude, to sort of freeze it and say, okay, how does it feel to be so superior? What does it feel like to have that contempt? Not adding anything to it with the papancha mill, adding onto it, but just having that attitude. How does it feel? What's the heart like to have that bitterness or that coldness, that harshness? What's it like? And then really receiving that, then just like the pleasantness of not clinging is apparent, it speaks for itself, the unpleasantness of hanging on to that harshness, that bitterness, that contemptuousness is like, ow! This is heavy, this is tense. Why do I do this to myself? So you don't have to, in a sense, create an idea, I should let this go, or this is bad for me to hang on to. It's just, ow, this hurts. And then there's a natural responsiveness, a relaxation comes from that, feeling the pain that we're causing ourselves. Like if you've got a needle and you're sticking it into your flesh, it's like, ow, why am I doing that? And as soon as you realize you're doing it, you stop poking yourself with the needle. So that's my first thought on that. Because if you try to climb over the contempt to smother everything with loving kindness, then you're not really acknowledging where that's coming from, and it doesn't really resolve it. So entering through that point of your own negative reaction is most helpful. And the last question, is inner peace dependent on having a practice or a certain lifestyle? The one-word answer is mostly. The inner peace, real peace, my experience is that you have to work for it. It doesn't just happen on its own. Sometimes there can be moments of a kind of benign, blessed quality, and all the sort of difficulties fall away. Just the universe clicks into a certain position, and wow. But I would say that's not so much an inner peace. That's more of a peace based on external conditions. Inner peace comes from work. It's not doesn't just happen on its own, and so that work then is supported by a practice, and also by lifestyle. The choices that we make. Who do we spend our time with? What do we put our attention onto? What do we choose to do or not do in terms of behavior? Do we refrain from telling lies or from harming others? What's the effect of that? So that I feel that if inner peace, the peace that comes from a genuine attunement of the heart to nature, to reality, it comes from work. It's the result of effort, and that effort, it's primarily sort of guided from within, from a practice of how the mind works with the experience of each moment, and then the external situation or the behaviors or the living situation that has an effect on how the mind relates and does that work moment by moment. So that I say that consideration of the lifestyle and the living the standards of speech and action that we establish, like keeping the precepts, they have a very direct and beneficial effect. But primarily, the peace comes from the attitude, the lifestyle and the precepts essentially support that, but it's the moment-by-moment attitude that is brought to the flow of experience, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, remembering, imagining. So the way the mind works with the present experience is the thing that makes a difference, and that's I say a practice. It doesn't. It won't be you won't drift towards peace. The heart will. It needs to be guided. There's work that needs to be done for the heart to be guided to arrive at peace. But also saying that it's work is not pejorative. That work can also be peaceful. It doesn't have to be stressful or burdensome. But with the skillful attitude, that work of establishing inner peace can also be joyful, can be something that is delightful and say something that is pleasant, enjoyable to do, rather than thinking of every kind of work as something that's a hassle or burdensome. So that is the end of the questions for this week. Thank you for all of that, and I wish everyone well to take whatever of these reflections are useful, and take them with you, and may they benefit your lives, and whatever is not useful, then please leave that aside. Ewan.